Ladies and gentlemen, when we speak of demons, we often picture shadowy figures or monstrous beings that lurk in dark corners of our imagination. But if we are to truly understand the concept of demonic influence, we must broaden our perspective and look at the subtle, sometimes unnoticed, manifestations of evil in our world. For it is not always through overt, dramatic displays that evil shows itself. In fact, the most dangerous signs of demonic presence are often masked by the mundane. Evil is rarely loud or flamboyant. It works its way into human lives with stealth and persistence. It begins not with a grand gesture, but with the smallest seed of pride, the smallest whisper of selfishness. If you wish to identify the presence of this destructive force, start by observing its signs in the actions of those around you. A person who constantly seeks control, manipulates others for personal gain, or elevates themselves above others in a way that diminishes their worth, these are signs that should not be ignored. Though these behaviors may seem like mere imperfections or character flaws, they are often symptoms of a deeper, more troubling corruption. Yet the true work of demonic influence is rarely visible on the surface. One of the most telling signs of its presence is a person's thoughts and attitudes. Look carefully at how they regard the world. Do they view life through a lens of bitterness, cynicism, or disdain for others? Do they mock those who try to live by moral principles, dismissing kindness, charity, and truth as naive or weak? The demon works in the mind, distorting perception, turning good into evil and virtue into foolishness. The more a person embraces this distorted worldview, the more they draw away from the light of reason and compassion, and the closer they come to the darkness. In relationships, too, the signs of demonic influence are often felt. A person who isolates themselves, who spreads division, who sows distrust among friends and communities, these are behaviors that signal something far more than mere disagreement. When relationships are torn apart by pride, manipulation, and the refusal to seek understanding, we must ask what forces are at work. The demon thrives in an environment where unity is fragmented, where suspicion replaces trust, and where isolation breeds despair. But the most tragic sign of demonic influence is not simply in the actions of the individual, it is in the effect these signs have on society. A society that embraces division, celebrates selfishness, and refuses to acknowledge the inherent dignity of each person is one that may already be under the sway of these darker powers. When we look around us and see that compassion is replaced by competition, generosity by greed, and unity by division, we must ask ourselves, are we witnessing a society led astray by its own demons? The signs are unmistakable when we take the time to look closely. But let us not despair, for there is hope. The same subtlety that allows demonic influence to creep into our lives can also be met with the quiet, patient work of goodness. If we are to resist these signs, we must actively cultivate humility, empathy, and a commitment to truth. We must be willing to confront the lies within ourselves, to seek reconciliation with those we've wronged, and to rebuild the ties that bind us to one another. When we talk about the concept of demons, it's essential to begin by rethinking what we mean by the term. Often we conjure images of sinister, supernatural creatures with horns and claws, lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce. But to focus solely on these fantastical images is to miss the real and present danger of what demons symbolize. In reality, demons are not confined to the realm of fiction or mythology. They are much closer to home, hidden in the ordinary events and decisions of daily life. The demonic represents more than just external forces or beings. It reflects a deep, internal moral and spiritual corruption that seeks to distort and destroy the inherent goodness in human nature. The concept of demons, when viewed through the lens of human nature, helps us understand that these forces do not manifest as direct, visible intruders, but rather work in subtler, insidious ways. The demonic force is deeply tied to the idea of moral failure when individuals allow pride, hatred, selfishness, and cruelty to guide their actions and shape their worldview. Rather than possessing or controlling people from the outside, demons often work by influencing the individual's own desires, shaping their will towards sin, and leading them away from the virtues that form the foundation of moral life. This internal, subtle form of demonic influence can appear in the smallest choices we make, choices that seem insignificant at first, but, over time, accumulate and transform a person's character. For example, consider the simple act of choosing to harbor a bitter thought or holding a grudge against someone. At first glance, it may seem like an innocent or understandable response, a natural reaction to being wronged. But when that bitterness festers, it grows into a more pervasive resentment. It gradually takes hold of the person, leading them to make decisions based on that negativity. The once small spark of irritation becomes a consuming fire of anger and hatred. Such a transformation, when seen in light of spiritual understanding, can be viewed as a manifestation of demonic influence, subtly pushing a person away from peace and towards destruction. The demonic's influence is often tied to a person's pride and inflated sense of self-importance that leads them to believe they are exempt from moral laws or social responsibilities. In this sense, demons do not necessarily appear as terrifying entities with malicious intent in the traditional sense. Instead, they are the whispers in the ear that suggest one is above reproach or better than others. This kind of pride leads to the belief that one's desires, opinions, and actions are always justified, regardless of how they may affect others. This attitude sets the stage for isolation from the truth, as the individual becomes unwilling to listen, reflect, or acknowledge their wrongdoings. Over time, this pride becomes an impenetrable armor, and the person begins to retreat further and further into their own constructed reality, a reality where they hold all the power and the rules no longer apply to them. Demons do not always seek to take over a person in dramatic, showy ways. Often, their power lies in their ability to convince an individual that they are doing no wrong at all. This is particularly evident in the way that evil works in the form of self-justification. People often convince themselves that their harmful actions, whether through manipulation, dishonesty, or cruelty, are justified by circumstances, personal needs, or the wrongdoings of others. In such moments, they fail to recognize the moral consequences of their actions, thinking they are entitled to behave in ways that violate basic ethical principles. The demon's power is in its ability to distort the moral compass, leading individuals to rationalize their destructive behaviors as not just acceptable, but necessary or even virtuous. The nature of demonic influence is such that it often operates in ways that seem entirely natural or commonplace. A person caught in the grip of pride or selfishness may not appear to be evil in the traditional sense. They may still carry out daily activities, interact with others, and live a seemingly normal life. But their thoughts and actions are becoming more self-centered, more driven by a desire for control, and less concerned with the well-being of others. In this sense, the demonic does not always announce itself with fearsome images or dramatic changes in behavior. It often grows through quiet, persistent choices that increasingly ignore the needs of others and the demands of virtue. What makes the demonic even more dangerous is that it is often difficult to detect. The signs are not always as obvious as those in classic tales of possession or supernatural interference. The demon is often camouflaged by normal human behaviors, pride, selfishness, greed, anger that are commonplace and seem harmless when isolated. However, when these traits are allowed to develop unchecked, they can grow into something far more destructive. It's only when we stop to reflect, to examine our hearts and actions with honesty, that we begin to see the gradual erosion of virtue and the slow encroachment of evil. And once this subtle influence takes hold, it becomes progressively more difficult to extricate oneself, as the very core of the individual's identity becomes shaped by their growing detachment from truth, goodness, and love. Evil is seldom overt or immediately recognizable. Rather than bursting into our lives with clear, alarming signs, it often sneaks in quietly, taking root in small, seemingly insignificant choices. The subtlety of evil is one of its most dangerous features, for it makes it difficult to identify and resist. Just as a creeping illness begins with a slight discomfort that gradually worsens, the demonic presence in a person's life typically starts with small indulgences, overlooked decisions, and moments of moral compromise. These minor lapses are easily dismissed or justified, but they create cracks in the moral foundation, allowing evil to gain a foothold. People often do things they know to be wrong, but they convince themselves that the circumstances justify their behavior. This process of self-justification is insidious because it allows individuals to act against their better judgment without feeling the full weight of their wrongdoing. The demonic influence works here by blurring the line between right and wrong, making moral distinctions seem less clear and harder to discern. When we justify our actions, whether by blaming others, claiming that the end justifies the means, or minimizing the consequences, we become more susceptible to further corruption. Small compromises become larger, and we begin to lose sight of the principles that once guided us. The subtlety of evil is also seen in the way it plays on our desires and weaknesses. It doesn't attack us with obvious temptation or grand schemes. Instead, it knows how to exploit the smaller, more personal desires we harbor deep within us. Our egos, our need for validation, our desire for control, these things may seem harmless or even natural, but they can become the very means through which evil entices us. A harmless desire for recognition can turn into a dangerous obsession with status and superiority, leading us to step on others to achieve our goals. Similarly, a natural desire to preserve one's comfort and security can give rise to selfishness, where the well-being of others is disregarded in the pursuit of personal gain. The demonic influence subtly amplifies these desires, distorting them until they begin to dominate our behavior, convincing us that satisfying these wants is worth any cost, including moral compromise. This subtle influence extends beyond personal desires and also operates in the realm of thought. Evil often does not reveal itself as an external force pulling us toward violence or depravity. Instead, it presents itself through the manipulation of ideas, attitudes, and perceptions. It takes root in the way we perceive the world around us and how we interpret our experiences. When we allow ourselves to view others with suspicion, when we let bitterness cloud our judgment, or when we choose to see life only through the lens of cynicism, we are inviting evil into our hearts. The demonic force often works through the gradual distortion of our worldview, making us less able to see the good in others, less willing to empathize, and more prone to judging others harshly. The subtlety of evil is also evident in its ability to disguise itself as something normal or even beneficial. This is perhaps one of the most dangerous aspects of its nature, its ability to appear harmless, even virtuous, when in fact it is the very opposite. For example, pride can be masked as confidence or self-assurance, making it difficult to recognize as a destructive force. Manipulation can be cloaked as persuasion, where one person convinces another to act in ways that serve their own interests, all while appearing helpful or well-meaning. Similarly, a selfish person may disguise their greed as a desire for self-improvement, convincing themselves that their actions are justified by their need for personal growth. The demonic influence thrives in these situations because it operates within the realm of normal human experiences, making it harder to detect and resist. Evil's subtle nature is also tied to its ability to build momentum over time. At first, the compromises we make seem minor, barely noticeable. A small lie here, a slight betrayal there, it all seems manageable. But as we continue to give in to these smaller temptations, we begin to normalize them. What was once a rare slip-up becomes a frequent occurrence, and we start to lose our sensitivity to what is right and wrong. The demonic influence works incrementally, in a way that makes it difficult to pinpoint when things began to go astray. Over time, these small acts of evil accumulate and have a cumulative effect on our character, eroding the very foundation of our morality. And it is not until we look back and see the distance we've traveled that we realize how far we have fallen from the principles that once guided us. The subtlety of evil can be seen in the way it encourages us to focus inwardly, away from the needs of others, and from the broader moral framework that holds society together. As we become more consumed with our own desires, ambitions, and grievances, we become less aware of how our actions impact those around us. This self-centeredness is at the heart of many demonic influences, for it fosters a worldview where the individual is the center, and everything else revolves around their wants and needs. The result is a breakdown in relationships, a loss of empathy, and a society that becomes increasingly fragmented. When we fail to see beyond our own desires, we become more susceptible to evil, as we no longer have the moral clarity or the compassion necessary to resist it. The subtle nature of evil is a challenge because it requires constant vigilance. It's not enough to simply be aware of the grand temptations or the dramatic choices. We must also be mindful of the small, seemingly insignificant decisions we make every day. The demonic does not announce itself with blaring alarms or flashing lights. It works in silence, using our weaknesses and desires to gradually lead us astray. To resist this subtle influence, we must cultivate awareness, humility, and a constant commitment to moral principles. Only by staying vigilant and refusing to ignore the small signs of compromise can we protect ourselves from the slow erosion of our character and the eventual dominance of evil in our lives. When examining the signs of demonic influence in the actions of individuals, we begin to see how the demon's work manifests through behaviors that, on the surface, might appear to be simple human flaws, but, in reality, reflect a deeper moral and spiritual corruption. The actions that stem from demonic influence often reveal a profound disconnect from virtue, a deliberate rejection of moral values, and a pursuit of personal power and gain at the expense of others. These actions are not always violent or extreme. Instead, they are frequently subtle manipulations, small but persistent actions that slowly erode trust, compassion, and integrity. It is not uncommon for individuals to exhibit behaviors that center around the need to dominate others, whether in personal relationships, work environments, or broader social interactions. When a person seeks power, not to serve or protect, but to exert dominance and crush opposition, it is a manifestation of evil's subtle work. The demon thrives in environments where individuals are constantly trying to elevate themselves above others, not by merit or virtue, but through manipulation, coercion, or force. This drive for control is often disguised as ambition or self-improvement, but it is motivated by pride and a desire for superiority, which leads to a disregard for the rights and well-being of others. In these situations, actions are calculated, not out of love or a desire to improve the collective good, but out of a fundamental selfishness. The individual's behavior may manifest in the form of manipulation, deceit, or cruelty as they seek to bend others to their will. A person under demonic influence may exploit those around them for personal gain, using others as mere tools to achieve their ends. This often appears in the form of gaslighting, where one manipulates someone's perception of reality to make them doubt their own sanity or judgment. This manipulation not only tears down the victim's sense of self, but also isolates them from others, reinforcing the control of the manipulator. The demon feeds off such power dynamics as they perpetuate a cycle of fear, confusion, and dependency. Alongside the thirst for control, another significant sign of demonic influence can be found in the way an individual reacts to criticism or accountability. A person who refuses to accept responsibility for their actions, who continually deflects blame, and who never acknowledges their wrongdoings is often under the sway of this darker force. When someone cannot tolerate correction or cannot admit fault, it is a clear indication that their pride has hardened their heart, preventing any possibility of growth or moral reflection. Instead of humbling themselves when confronted with their mistakes, they lash out, defend their actions, or even shift the blame onto others. The demon works in these moments by preventing the individual from engaging in self-examination and repentance, trapping them in a cycle of denial and arrogance. This rejection of responsibility often ties into a larger pattern of selfishness and a lack of empathy. The individual becomes more concerned with their own image and maintaining their position of superiority than with considering how their actions impact others. When someone is unwilling to recognize the consequences of their behavior, it reveals a deep disconnect from the moral and emotional realities that bind us as human beings. This lack of empathy often results in cruel or thoughtless behavior as the person fails to see or care about the harm they cause. In extreme cases, this can lead to bullying, abuse, or exploitation, where the suffering of others is either ignored or even justified in the name of personal gain. Actions under demonic influence often involve a profound distortion of truth. When an individual consistently lies, not out of necessity but as a habit, it is a sign that they have embraced falsehood as a means of controlling reality. Lies, especially those that are repeated to an extent where they become a part of the person's identity, are a powerful weapon of the demon. By distorting truth, the individual not only misleads others, but also distorts their own understanding of the world. This deception can manifest in big lies or small, everyday falsehoods, but the pattern is the same: a rejection of truth and a willingness to bend reality for personal advantage. As the lies multiply, the individual becomes increasingly disconnected from reality, losing sight of what is real and good in favor of an imagined world where they control the narrative. The way in which individuals treat those beneath them in social hierarchies is also a revealing sign of demonic influence. A person under the sway of evil may disregard the dignity and worth of those who are weaker or less powerful, treating them as less than human. This is most clearly seen in behaviors such as exploitation, discrimination, and cruelty toward marginalized or vulnerable groups. The demon's work is evident when people fail to see others as equals, when they use their power to oppress or demean, rather than uplift and serve. The demonic influence feeds on the degradation of others, making the powerful feel entitled to mistreat the powerless. The more they indulge in these behaviors, the more entrenched they become in a mindset of superiority, making it harder for them to recognize the humanity of others and to act with compassion. The obsession with status and material success is another key indicator of demonic influence. A person who places their identity and worth in external achievements, wealth, fame, accolades often loses sight of the internal virtues that define true greatness, such as kindness, humility, and honesty. The demon's influence takes root in the form of vanity, where an individual becomes obsessed with their image and how others perceive them. This leads to a constant desire for recognition and praise, which in turn fosters a sense of emptiness and dependence on external validation. The more a person seeks affirmation from the world, the more they become disconnected from their true self and the values that should guide their actions. Materialism and status-seeking behaviors ultimately blind a person to the deeper, more meaningful aspects of life, pushing them further into the arms of the demon. Evil, when manifesting subtly in a person's life, often works through the quiet erosion of their moral compass. One of the most significant ways this occurs is through the gradual detachment from empathy, compassion, and genuine concern for others. When an individual begins to lose touch with the feelings and needs of those around them, they are not simply acting out of selfishness, they are under the influence of something deeper. The demon, in this sense, works not by force, but by fostering a state of indifference, where a person's capacity for true emotional connection with others diminishes over time. This coldness does not appear overnight, but gradually, often disguised as self-preservation or pragmatism. This detachment from empathy is most evident when someone becomes indifferent to the suffering of others, even when that suffering is right in front of them. In extreme cases, the demon's work becomes visible in the form of cruelty and apathy toward the pain of others. This could manifest in people turning a blind eye to injustice, ignoring the plight of the needy, or showing a complete lack of concern for those who are hurting. The individual under the influence of evil is not necessarily overtly malicious or hateful often, they are simply emotionally numb. They fail to recognize the humanity in others, and their moral vision becomes clouded, allowing them to justify actions or inactions that harm others without any feeling of guilt or remorse. This gradual erosion of empathy can be seen in the way a person treats those they consider weaker or less fortunate. In the absence of compassion, the person may act condescendingly, belittle others, or take advantage of vulnerable people without any second thought. The demon's influence works here by creating a state of moral blindness where the person cannot or will not see the inherent worth and dignity of every human being. It becomes easy for them to dismiss the struggles of others, reducing them to mere obstacles or inconveniences in their own pursuit of power, wealth, or status. In doing so, they perpetuate a cycle of harm, where the suffering of others is overlooked or even actively caused without a sense of responsibility or accountability. The absence of empathy also manifests in the way people handle relationships. Those under the sway of demonic influence may have difficulty connecting with others on a deep, emotional level. Instead of genuine care or concern for the well-being of those around them, their relationships may be reduced to transactions, where the only value is what the other person can provide for them. They may exploit others for personal gain or emotional fulfillment, using them as tools to meet their own needs. The demon thrives in these environments, where relationships are no longer built on mutual respect, trust, and love, but on manipulation and control. Over time, this emotional detachment leads to isolation and loneliness, even if the person is surrounded by people. Their inability to connect with others on a deeper level leaves them emotionally bankrupt, even if they may appear successful or influential on the surface. When faced with situations that require a choice between doing what is right and what is expedient, the person may begin to abandon their moral convictions in favor of self-interest. The demon's influence is evident when individuals begin to justify unethical behavior, rationalizing their actions as necessary for survival or success. In doing so, they desensitize themselves to the moral implications of their choices, further detaching themselves from the core principles of right and wrong. The more they indulge in these self-serving choices, the more difficult it becomes for them to recognize the harm they are causing, not only to others but also to themselves. The erosion of empathy and compassion is not always an immediate or dramatic process. It is often slow, taking place over years or even decades, as individuals make one small decision after another that gradually distances them from their moral center. The demon works quietly, patiently, allowing the individual to become desensitized to the suffering of others and increasingly focused on their own desires and needs. The more they indulge in their self-centeredness, the more difficult it becomes to feel for others or to care about anything beyond their own immediate gratification. In some cases, this detachment can even become institutionalized or normalized within social systems. When the larger culture fosters attitudes of individualism, competition, and success at all costs, it becomes easier for people to lose sight of the common good and the needs of others. Social systems, workplaces, and even entire societies can become cold, transactional spaces where people view one another as means to an end, rather than as individuals worthy of respect and dignity. In these environments, empathy and compassion are not only discouraged but actively undermined, reinforcing the demonic influence on a broader scale. Evil is most powerful when it masks itself under the guise of normality, sometimes even appearing to be virtuous or beneficial at first glance. One of the most dangerous aspects of demonic influence is its ability to disguise itself as something good or necessary, fooling individuals into thinking that what they are engaging with is justified or even righteous. The demon does not always present itself in the form of an obvious temptation or malevolent act. Often, it works more subtly, slipping into the fabric of daily life and convincing individuals to embrace destructive behaviors under the assumption that they are doing the right thing. This is the false virtue that is so pervasive and difficult to detect because it wears the mask of righteousness while hiding its true nature. The demon's ability to masquerade as something positive is evident in the way it distorts values such as ambition, success, and self-reliance. In a society that values achievement and progress, the pursuit of these things can easily be manipulated. What might start as a healthy desire to improve oneself or provide for one's family can quickly become a relentless obsession with personal gain, where the individual sacrifices ethics, relationships, and even their own well-being in the pursuit of success. The demonic influence does not tell the person to abandon their goals, but it whispers that their worth is determined solely by what they achieve. It tells them that they must push harder, work longer, and sacrifice more without regard for the damage it does to their spirit or the people around them. What was once an innocent drive for success is turned into a thirst for power and status, and the individual finds themselves lost in a cycle of striving that brings no fulfillment, only emptiness. This subtle shift is what makes the demon's work so insidious. Instead of encouraging individuals to engage in blatant, harmful actions, it distorts their sense of what is important, making them believe that they must focus on self-interest at all costs. The pursuit of success, under this influence, is no longer about growth, contribution, or the well-being of others. It becomes about the individual's recognition, their place in the social order, and their sense of superiority. This distorts the true purpose of work and achievement, turning it into a trap where the person is caught up in a never-ending quest for more, leaving them spiritually bankrupt, despite their worldly success. The demon often cloaks selfish behavior in a facade of moral superiority, convincing individuals that their actions are justified because they are rooted in a sense of moral righteousness. This can be seen in cases where people become excessively self-righteous, using their supposed virtues to justify acts of judgment, cruelty, or exclusion. This could manifest in the form of someone who engages in moral or religious condemnation of others, convinced that their strict adherence to a set of beliefs makes them better than others. The demon distorts the person's sense of right and wrong, pushing them to take a rigid, unyielding stance on their beliefs, while ignoring the more compassionate aspects of those same beliefs. Such individuals may believe they are acting out of moral obligation, but in reality they are driven by pride and a desire for control. They become more concerned with being seen as morally superior than with understanding the hearts of those they judge. This form of self-righteousness creates division and alienation, as the person is less interested in reconciling differences or showing love and mercy than in asserting their own moral authority. The demon thrives on this division, turning what could be a means of spiritual growth into a platform for self-promotion and condemnation. The result is a warped form of virtue that leads to spiritual isolation and the fostering of an environment where judgment is substituted for grace. The falsehood of virtuousness is also evident in the way the demon manipulates emotional responses, particularly guilt and shame. In many cases, the demonic influence works by convincing individuals that they are unworthy or morally inferior, even when they have done no wrong. It distorts the natural conscience, turning guilt into a tool for self-punishment rather than self-reflection. Instead of fostering true humility and growth, this kind of guilt makes the individual focus on their perceived flaws and failures, often preventing them from taking positive action toward change. This false guilt can push people into self-destructive behavior, where they believe they are unworthy of redemption or improvement, even if they are simply experiencing normal human shortcomings. Shame, too, is distorted in a way that leads to a false humility. Instead of fostering healthy self-awareness and an understanding of one's limitations, the demon uses shame to reinforce feelings of inadequacy and isolation. The individual becomes convinced that their mistakes are part of their identity, and as a result, they find it difficult to move beyond their past or to seek help from others. This kind of internalized shame becomes a powerful barrier to healing, keeping the person trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and despair. What could be an opportunity for growth and learning is instead turned into a means of self-flagellation and internal torment, preventing any real progress. The demon also exploits the human need for approval and belonging, turning these natural desires into something destructive. It feeds on the need to fit in and be accepted, especially within social or professional circles. This desire, when manipulated, can lead individuals to engage in behaviors that are contrary to their values, just to gain favor or avoid rejection. The demon convinces them that fitting in is more important than standing by one's principles or integrity. This could lead to a person engaging in unethical behavior, participating in harmful gossip, or abandoning their values to gain approval from others. The demon uses the very natural desire for connection to erode personal integrity and cultivate an atmosphere where social acceptance becomes more important than moral truth. The demon's ability to disguise evil as something good or virtuous also works through the distortion of love and relationships. In some cases, people find themselves in relationships that seem loving or fulfilling on the surface, but which are actually manipulative or controlling. The demonic influence works by convincing one person that their possessiveness, jealousy, or desire to control the other person is an expression of love. What might appear to be a protective or passionate relationship is actually a toxic bond driven by insecurity and fear. The demon twists the concept of love, turning it into a means of control and dependency. Instead of fostering mutual respect and freedom, the relationship becomes a prison, where both parties are emotionally trapped and manipulated into believing that this unhealthy dynamic is love. This ability to disguise evil as something good creates an environment where individuals struggle to recognize the true nature of their behavior and their relationships. They become so blinded by the appearance of virtue that they fail to see the destructive forces at work beneath the surface. The demon thrives on this deception, as it makes it difficult for people to discern the true nature of their actions, leading them further away from moral clarity and spiritual truth. This is why it is so important to develop the capacity for discernment, to be able to see beyond the surface appearances and recognize when something that seems virtuous is actually a subtle manifestation of evil. Only by doing so can individuals protect themselves from falling victim to this false virtue that the demon offers,